Good afternoon. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Nicola Kemp and I'm Editorial Director of Creativebrief. If you don't know us, Creativebrief is a marketing platform for ambitious brands and agencies, providing them the intelligence and connection to create the most powerful work. And it's powerful work we're talking about today, namely the shortlist for this year's prestigious Gerety Awards. The Gerety Awards was named for Frances Gerety, the copywriter who coined the slogan, "A diamond is forever." It's unique in the market because it judges the best advertising through the female lens, successfully redefining the standard to which advertising is held. All female juries from across the globe come together to define, debate, and deliberate creative brilliance. And we are super lucky today because we have some of those brilliant creatives with us to lift the lid on the best work and how we successfully change the narrative for women in our industry. Jo Wallace is Creative Director at Wunderman Thompson, who is also chair of the Gerety Awards jury. She has won more awards and accolades than I can count and has a vision to effect positive change through disruptive solutions, both within and beyond advertising. She has written and directed short films, co-created exhibitions, and also created the most interesting dinner party you will ever go to, her not-for-profit Good Girls Eat Dinner, which provides much needed, brilliant female role models for the creative industries, as well as great food. Paulina Zabraskaya is Creative Director at Abbott Mead Vickers BBDO, and she also has a cabinet full of awards metal. Her work has included Heineken's award-winning The Dilemma campaign, and she was also named one of Campaign and Creative Equal's top 30 female creative trailblazers. Shelina Janmohamed is the Vice President of Ogilvy's Islamic Marketing, the world's first bespoke global Islamic branding practice for building brands with Muslim audiences. She is also a best-selling author. She's written Love in a Headscarf, a memoir about growing up as a British Muslim woman, and her debut children's book, The Extraordinary Life of Serena Williams, which brilliantly tells the story of the world's greatest tennis player, has also just launched. So congratulations to her. And Loriley Sessions quit her job to join a company that had only existed for a few days, New Commercial Arts, one of the most exciting and compelling new creative companies of recent times. Having joined as a creative, she has taken joining a startup in the midst of a global pandemic in her stride, and she successfully hit the ground running with brilliant work, including the Our Second Chance campaign for the World's Out of Home organization. Having successfully stalked her on LinkedIn and Twitter, I love a bit of LinkedIn stalking, I can also tell you that she used to be a recipe editor and she takes very beautiful pictures of gluten-free food. I was looking at it last night and it really did send me straight to the cupboard for some snacks, which is a good thing. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And to kick off, I don't want to start on a negative note, but I feel that it's quite poignant that we're having this conversation today in the context of women's careers being disproportionately impacted by the coronavirus crisis. Now, we know that the gender pay gap reporting may be on hold, but women and their careers are not. So, as the makeup of the Gerety Award jury reminds us, it is not impossible to get to 50%, we can go beyond. So to kick off, I'd love everyone to sort of share their biggest highlight and learning from the experience. So could I kick off with you, Jo, please?
Yeah, sure. I absolutely kind of agree that it's really poignant right now as women's careers are most affected by the whole coronavirus epidemic. I think for me, it was just wonderful to kind of see everybody, some of who I knew more than others, but it was amazing to meet new people too. I've been fortunate enough to meet a lot of the women on the jury, either because through industry events or because they've been kind enough to speak at Good Girls Eat Dinner. But I think it was great to just get together and have a debate. And I've been on many juries, and it's interesting how the male gaze does differ slightly to the female gaze. And I do think that different work will come to the fore because of the female gaze and the way that women interpret work. I don't think it's hugely different. A good idea is still a good idea, of course, but there is an element of nuance of what appeals to different headsets, really.
That's really interesting to hear. Loriley, what was your take on the awards and having that experience of an all-female judging panel as well, and that female lens that Jo mentioned?
I just feel really privileged to be here. I know everyone sort of says things like that, but obviously I've only been in the industry 7 years, so I've come from quite a non-traditional advertising background. And it's just so great to be on a panel with so many amazing women and actually see those role models and see those positions of senior management. Obviously, so many of us aspire to be. So I think it's just so important for younger women in the industry to see so many great women speaking and having their opinions heard. And I think one of the things that Jo said, who sort of set up the Gerety Awards, it's just really interesting that actually if they can do 100% female jury, then surely others can do a 50-50. And yeah, just so important to make sure that we get that balance, because obviously, like Jo said, diverse opinions are so important because that's who our audience are. It's no good just talking to one type of person, because at the end of the day, we're all very different. So it's really important to have that diversity.
Thank you. And I think that's such a great point about raising the bar. I think we've sort of taken that sort of, oh, I asked all the women and I only found one for longer than I would like. Polina, what was your takeaway from judging the awards?
Yeah, I agree with Jo and Loriley. It's interesting. It's an interesting experience to participate in an all-female judging panel, because I think we rarely talk about it, but those opportunities to judge festivals and to be awarded at festivals, they're huge career boosts. And especially at the times like these, when those connections are important, we know that all those men who judged all those shows and know each other, they can rely on that circle to help them find opportunities when those opportunities are so rare and far between. So I think women supporting women in situations like these, yes, someone would say it's unfair, but for us, it's our survival mode, because no one else would help younger women to find these internships, or women at a more senior level to find that one creative director position that is open still in the market. So I think that element is quite important too.
I think that's such a good point and such a good reason to sort of say yes to these opportunities for judging, because that networking opportunity, like to build a collective of women and to be inspired by other creative women and get those opportunities, is so vital. Thank you. And Shelina, what was your big takeaway?
Well, I mean, just the chance to immerse myself in all this beautiful, powerful, creative, moving, sometimes hilariously funny work. I mean, that's such a treat anyway. And I think you're right, the world we live in feels very difficult, and that chance to see all that incredibly different way of seeing the world that tries to shift our attitudes and behaviours just felt quite hopeful to me, because we want to see the world in a different way from where we are now, and the fact that there was so much great work that could help us do that just felt very optimistic to me, that we've got creativity and people out there that can help us to shift the dial. But in terms of having the all-female jury, that almost was like a multiplier effect of being able to see the world in a different way. So we had great work that already shifted our thinking, and then we had women whose gaze and whose views we don't really get to hear in this very widespread way, just amplifying what that could be. And I think we have started in the industry to understand that work created by women or work created by underrepresented voices is important, but actually the people who decide and who have an opinion about it are also an important piece of the puzzle that we need to think about. And often women were kind of like, well, my opinion doesn't really matter and it's not of value, and we kind of defer it. Well, what a great thing. We've given all these women this chance to have an opinion about what counts as great work. And we have to recognise that the opinion shapers are just as important as the people who are creating the ideas. So I think this kind of brings the best of that together and amplifies it in ways that we're going to see in the results will be phenomenal.
I think that's such a lovely point. Also the optimism, like I really enjoyed, I spent ages on the just looking at the shortlisted work, and there was a lot of work that I haven't seen, and I spend, you know, most of my time writing about creative work, and it was just so nice to kind of delve into the work. I'd love to get your views on the trends that you saw, anything you got excited about this year, or anything surprising about the awards. Jo, could I kick off with you?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's always interesting kind of talking about trends, and of course there will be subtle trends, and no doubt next year there'll be a massive pandemic related trend within work. But I guess in a way it was lovely to see such a broad spread of ideas, and I think it's really just always about impact and how is this going to affect somebody. And of course there's a category that is about doing good, and that's always a real personal favorite of mine, where it actually affects change. But let's not forget that even kind of selling things, you can do it in a way that impacts people. If you make them feel kind of heard or seen, or make them laugh and entertain them, I think it's always really important. So I think as a jury, you're watching work and seeing work in a way that it's very much about a visceral feeling, and of course it's subjective, but there's always ultimately, I think, about the power of the work and the impact of it. And occasionally it will be work that does divide people. I think we won't be the first jury to have been divided around the Mouldy Whopper work. Some of us kind of loved it, some of us feel that it was kind of award bait, but we had a great discussion around it, and of course you appreciate other people's perspectives, and it's really interesting to hear. So I think work that has an impact and makes you kind of sit up and have a discussion is always going to push through.
I love the fact that there is, like, often when you look at award winners and the list, you kind of see it as everyone agreed. You kind of assumed that is seen as like creative brilliance, but actually everyone has their own opinion, and that's good too. Polina, I'd love to get your view. I mean, what did you see as the kind of key drivers to creativity and effectiveness? Because there is always this perennial debate about, is this created for an awards jury essentially rather than the consumer, and we often see that. But at the same time, having an award in mind or trying to create your best work also helps raise the bar, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's wonderful about fresher award shows like Gerety is that you see some surprising entries that probably wouldn't be entered into the Cannes Lions or One Show because of those exorbitant fees. And I was quite surprised by the cultural spread of the work. So you see some pieces that you wouldn't see anywhere else, and they feel unique and different, and they have a point of view that is not yet a status quo in the Western world. So to me, that was the main highlight of the judging process. I was surprised, I was touched, I felt puzzled sometimes, and it is a good thing when you are on a jury. So yeah, I felt that this show was unique in a way.
I think that's so interesting, because it does, to your point, it does often feel like there's certain brands or campaigns that almost dominate the conversation around awards. So I love the idea of having a bit more cultural diversity and actually seeing something that you haven't seen before as well. I thought that was like a real point of the diversity of the shortlist. Shelina, what was your takeaway around the creativity and effectiveness of the work that you saw?
Some of the entries just completely blew me away and have left me really thinking about them for a long time afterwards. So there were some which took problems which are completely entrenched and which we take as received wisdom, and just completely shifted the paradigm.
Thank you. And Loriley, what were the standout sort of moments for you from a creative and effective perspective?
I think touched on by quite a lot of us was the sheer spread across the world. I don't think I've ever seen that much work from so many different countries, and I think it just makes you think about things completely differently. I think obviously advertising is so much about solving problems, but obviously when different cultures and countries have different problems to solve and different insights, it's just so interesting to watch as a just someone who's never experienced that before, to have that little window into other people's worlds and understand more about how they live. I agree, I also laughed a lot at some of these and also felt quite touched. I really loved the miscarriage cards. So just such a simple idea of that. Obviously when women go through a miscarriage, they often feel like friends and family want to support them and show that they're there for them and care about them, but how do you do so? What words do you say? And I think in an industry where we're all about words, how amazing that a panel of women could create, who have experienced miscarriages, could create these unique cards that could be sent to women to show their support and love in those situations. Just such a simple thing, but just something that had never been done, and you think, why isn't that out there? Why isn't that in the card shop? So really great to see, really the simple ideas that really create impact.
And I love the budget for that card campaign. I mean, it was like just over £850. It's just immeasurable, the creative power of getting that message out there. It's just also the reminder, isn't it? There's some work that you have seen, but you being reminded of it and actually really looking into the story of it is really inspiring. And with that in mind, I mean, could you share your experience of being on the jury and also making the time to be on the jury? You know, I know time is such a finite resource, arguably in lockdown where, you know, there's even more video calls, you know, people have children at home or caring responsibilities as well. You know, being on awards juries is such a great way to build your network, to be exposed to creative work across the globe, but also, you know, it involves a conscious decision to say yes, to make the time to do it and to put the value in your own opinions. What have you learned from this process around that, and what would you say to women that are maybe thinking, I'm not sure if this is for me? Jo, could I kick off with you?
I think for me, it's always a real privilege to be asked to judge. So it's unfortunate that occasionally I do have to say no, purely from a kind of workload perspective, but I'll always attempt to say yes, just because I think it's a great inspiration. You know, we get embedded in our clients that we work on. We kind of have our world of what matters and what ideas we're trying to push through, and it's always so refreshing when you judge work that it opens up your world again. And I find it incredibly inspirational, if nothing else, and then it's always, like you say, a great way to network. So I think wherever possible, it's brilliant to say yes, particularly when female kind of jurors are sometimes less in the mix. So it's a great opportunity, and I'd definitely encourage people to grasp it.
And Loriley, what was your take on it? And did you have any idea what the process was going to be like? And what would you say to other women that are looking at being on a jury and that experience? Because it's a great way to be exposed to a plethora of brilliant work, which is, especially in this kind of time when we're all a bit remote from each other, it feels like a bit of creative oxygen that we can all do with right now.
So this is my first ever jury, so I had no idea what to experience and what it was going to be like, but it was just, I think it's just about making time and setting aside time. I think we're all busy, no matter, I mean, we strive for better constantly. We always want to write better, make better. So you have to set aside time, but just having that opportunity to have your voice heard and to listen to others and their opinions. Obviously, it would have been amazing to have met in person. I'm sure it would have been a different experience. But even with the Zoom chats and the notes on the judging forum, it's great to just see how different everyone thinks. And I think it's so important because it just goes to show that opinions are different and there's no right or wrong opinion. So never ever feel like your opinion shouldn't be heard or isn't the right one, because we all think so differently, and that's just what makes the world go round. So yeah, it's just just a good learning curve to sort of push yourself to do better and have your voice heard.
I think that's such a lovely point about how it's okay to disagree when it comes to the work and what we love, and that doesn't mean our opinions aren't valid. Polina, what was your takeaway from the experience of saying yes?
I think it's so interesting how your taste evolves the more work you see. And when you understand what type of work makes you smile, what type of work gives you this little feeling that it's very special, you learn where to look for that feeling in your own work. So I think basically it just makes you a better creative when you are exposed to so much work from around the world. A better creative director, a better teammate, because sometimes you think you don't like the idea, but you see other jurors passionately push for it. And it teaches you to be a little bit more humble about your own opinions, and sometimes just give up and say, yes, this idea is not for me, and I know about myself that that type of ideas is probably not for me, but it doesn't mean that this idea shouldn't exist. So you would, even though you as a creative director sometimes you don't like something, you can still support your teams and help them make it happen in the best shape possible. I think it just makes your mind more flexible, I would say.
I love that. It's like a workout for your creative mind, and almost like creative self-awareness as well, which is difficult sometimes when you're really passionate about something. And Shelina, what did you take away from the process in terms of the experience of being on the judging panel, and what you get out of it?
So like Joe was saying, there is a certain sense of when you're invited to be a judge, it's quite an overwhelming feeling because it is a position of prestige and privilege. And I think there's a certain amount of doing it for the greater good, to having a sense of awareness that you are playing a part in advancing a diversity of opinion and ensuring that women are visible and that their voices are heard. So it's really important to play your part in doing that and kind of suppress all that kind of imposter feeling you might have about, am I worthy to be a judge, and do I have the time? Time kind of can make itself if something's important. But there's also a piece around self-development. And I know when I first started judging, there's a sense of, well, I'm supposed to be the final product. I'm supposed to sort of sit on a pedestal and know everything that there is to know and hand down an opinion. And actually, being a judge I found it to be a very important experience for my own self-development, because you have to look at some work, you have to assess it based on some criteria, you have to really think deeply about it, and then you have to have an opinion about it. You've got a scale and you have to judge it, and then you have to advocate for it. And those are really important skills as you start to develop in your career. And so I think if anyone's asked to be a judge, there is a kind of rather selfish element to it, which is it just really helps you to have a point of view on the world, and to stand up for it and to develop, as Polina was saying, your own sense of what is creative and what is effective and what works and what you would like to see more of and have it ordered. So, let's not shy away from the fact that there's something we as individuals, as judges, get out of it as well, because I think that's such a great part of the privilege of being asked to judge.
I think that's such an interesting and valid point as well, because I think sometimes you know, we see our points of view as like these fixed things, when actually they're this like muscle that you develop and you continue to develop. And actually sometimes the best thing is not knowing, like to not know and then have the opportunity to learn. I just want to switch it a little bit just to talk about the female lens, because so much of our industry is still seen through a white male lens. Did you think that because there was an all-female jury, different work came to the fore? Was there any sort of shift that you felt in the judging process? Polina, could I kick off with you, please?
I think good work is good work. So sometimes you don't have to be a female judge to appreciate something universally brilliant. But of course, there is, as Jo mentioned, there is this slight difference, and that slight difference is significant enough for us to be pushing for it. Because, for example, I've noticed that some of the work that mostly male jury panels celebrate is just insensitive. You know, it's just slightly horrible towards the rest of the world. Yes, it's funny, but it's the type of humor that can hurt someone. And I think women are a little bit more sensitive to that. I'm not saying that we are much better and we are the ultimate barometer of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, but I think we are conditioned through our upbringing to monitor the well-being of others. So our first thought sometimes would be, okay, this is funny, but how does it affect the wider audience? Is it a joke at someone's expense? And I think in all female juries or 50-50 juries, that work is less likely to succeed. And that was my observation.
It's a really interesting point. Loriley, could I bring you in here? I mean, what was your experience of that lens being different, especially kind of being quite fresh to the judging process? Like, do you feel that there are benefits from shifting the lens and looking at the industry from a slightly different perspective?
It's difficult because obviously this is my first panel that I've experienced, so I haven't got anything to compare it by, but I agree with Polina. I think good work is good work, and we shouldn't ever think that we just need to make sure there's a balance. And I think going forward, I think the Gerety sets a great standard to show there are amazing women out there who have great opinions, who should be on judging panels, and there's no reason that going forward we shouldn't have more of a 50-50 split. I touched on it at the beginning, but just I think diversity from all across the world, no matter whether however you identify, whatever your age, I think we just need a better spread of people, whoever we are and wherever we're from, because at the end of the day, we are representing people. So we're representing the world. So we need to make sure we have that diverse spread in who the judges are. So I don't necessarily think that's a man-woman thing, but it's just making sure that everyone is represented.
That's such a good point. And also, like, just sort of looking at the commercial aspect to this discussion, which is massive, because, you know, and was very much up front and center when the Gerety Awards began, that gap between the fact that 80% of purchase decisions are made by women, yet only 12 to 13% of creative directors are women. So, Jo, I'd love to ask you, how can we close this gap quicker? Because we have to be realistic about the disproportionate impact of the coronavirus crisis on women's creative careers. So what can we do about it? I feel like we should be shouting about it and making this progress happen faster.
Yeah, and I think I absolutely agree that I wish it could happen faster. And with 20 years in the advertising industry, I have to be honest, I'm a bit sick and tired of hearing talk about it and less action. So I think there's a very real situation where we have too much lip service paid to the need for diverse teams and diverse leaders. And it suits people to talk about it, but it's a different thing for them to actually action it. And it's something that I find kind of incredible, really, within our industry, that it's almost a definition of madness, of talking to ourselves about here's a good idea, oh, but who are we really talking to if everyone that's made the idea is homogenous? So who are we really talking to? Look outside the door. The world isn't homogenous. It isn't a group of white straight men. Buyers, as you say, 80% are women, and there's a huge diversity in the audience we're talking to. So that it would make sense that the people creating it have got that same diverse spread. And I do think that steps are being taken, but come on, it's so slow.
Yeah, it's a fair point, especially on the less lip service, more action. Shelina, I'd love to bring you in here, because I was thinking about this whole theme of changing the narrative, and I love how you are affecting change in the world by changing the narrative. You know, my children will read your book that you wrote about, you know, that is a different narrative to what, you know, has traditionally been held up as the hero. But how do we better galvanize men, really, and women across the industry to change this narrative? Because we know this new narrative that's more inclusive is more commercially successful. So how do we push this faster?
I mean, we've been, as Jo says, we've been talking about the things we need to do for a while around, you know, how do you get more diverse people into the business? How do you get more of them into the room? How do you make sure the voices are heard? The kind of trainings and insights we can use around, you know, people talk about allyship and unconscious bias and, you know, inclusivity. So there has been a lot of discussion. I think the challenge is actually making it happen. And one of the things I love about the fact that this is an all-female jury is the challenge of what does it look like when you are more inclusive? I mean, in a way, cranking the dial to max and saying, what happens when women get to decide? Well, it's kind of two sides of a coin. On the one side, the world doesn't fall apart. So you know what, you can have more women in deciding positions. It's fine. You know, we're still recognizing great work. It's not like all the women sit around in a little coven and go, we're only going to reward work about periods and, you know, anti-aging. So I think in a way there's a nice challenge there to go, when you get women into positions of deciding, it works, but also does that mean we can allow more talent and more diversity to flourish? And I think that is kind of having those two things together, that, you know, the world isn't going to fall apart, but actually the world could be a better, more enjoyable, diverse, creative place full of great ideas and great work.
I think that's such a lovely point, and also just more fun. Like, actually it's a much more like inclusive creative work is more fun to create. It's more exciting. It's more beneficial to everybody. So to close, I'm just gonna say thank you to all of you, because not only did you say yes to the jury, you said yes to making the time to do this panel. So I massively appreciate that. And I just want to ask you all to give just a tip for women in the industry forging ahead in this new era of remote working and a drive really to be creative in a world that is economically and emotionally challenging. What would be your tip? And Loriley, I'd like to kick off with you, because this was your first jury, and obviously not your last. So I'd really like to get your take first, please.
Sure. So I'd say just to be passionate, speak with confidence and stand your ground. I think what I've learned over the years, if you walk into a room and speak with confidence, you're already halfway there. If you present any ideas with any lack of confidence or I'm not sure about this one, everyone's already switched off. So even if you're not sure yourself, just speak with confidence and then the rest will follow.
Great advice. Thank you. And Polina, what would your advice be?
It's a tough one, because I think I'll give a very Russian advice. Don't take any shit, and be very direct about what you want and why it matters. Because sometimes we hide behind excuses, or I don't want to disturb anyone, or I don't want to cause any inconvenience. And for women especially, it just slows you down. And yes, you can be considerate, and you can take other people's interests into consideration, but you have to focus on what's important for you and what will make you succeed, because nobody else would. Not in this particular industry. And yes, rely on other women, ask for help, reach out. If you don't know how that amazing cut was made, reach out to the person who made it and ask the question, and they're very likely to respond and explain in detail how it was made.
That's great advice. Thank you. And Shelina, what would yours be?
Have an opinion. That puts your stake in the ground, and remember that your opinion is valid and your opinion matters. That's why you're there, and someone's given you a space at the table. So have your opinion and make it known.
Thank you. And last but not least, Jo.
Oh, I get the easy thing now to say that I agree with everybody, but yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, be sure of your reason for being there. As a woman, you probably had to work a little bit harder to get there, so I think that stands you in good stead, and stand up for what you believe in.
Thank you. Thank you all for taking the time to talk about your experience of judging the Gerety Awards. It's been really inspiring to hear your insights. I'm definitely going to be taking the less lip service, don't take any shit, but also, you know, to have faith in your opinions is really, really important. And thank you everyone for tuning in, and thank you so much to the Gerety Awards for reminding us all that it is possible to raise the bar. And no, we will not take we asked all the women and we only have one juror or one columnist or whatever it is. We can get to 50-50 regardless of the coronavirus crisis. So thank you so much to all of you for taking the time to talk to us today. And thank you so much for the Gerety Awards as well. Thank you.